Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on thespeakingpodcast.com. We're also on BitChute and YouTube. You'll find the links in the podcast description. I've also got 4 other podcasts: The Awakening to expose fraud and corruption, but with solutions; The Meditation to help you chill; Learn Polish to obviously learn Polish; and The Crypto to learn about blockchain technology. I'm also a podcasting coach. You'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. My guest today, speaker, best-selling author, podcaster, and patient advocate. Please welcome Andrea Wilson Woods.
Hi, Roy. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, delighted to have you on. So you might, obviously I've mentioned a few things, but you might let the listeners know who's Andrea.
See, and I just want to listen to you talk because I love your accent. So I'm a public speaker. I'm an author of a medical memoir titled Better Off Bald: The Life in 147 Days. And that's won numerous awards and been endorsed by the medical establishment, which makes me very proud and happy. I'm a patient advocate, so I'm president and founder of Blue Faery, the Adrienne Wilson Liver Cancer Association, which is a nonprofit dedicated to fighting primary liver cancer. And then I'm also a podcaster too of the Cancer Youth Thrivers podcast. And each week I interview cancer patients, caregivers, survivors, and providers about their cancer journeys.
Excellent. And we're going to dive into the story, how everything began. But what I want to ask first is, what's your own speaking journey? When did that begin?
Well, I'm going to share a story I don't think I've ever shared before, and this should have been a clue that I was destined to be a speaker at some point in my life. So when I was in the 6th grade, our teacher, and he was one of the only male teachers, and he was a fantastic teacher, and he created this thing called the 700 Club. And at that time, at least in the US, but I think worldwide, the 700 Club was this Christian, I think it was even a network, but it was definitely a show. And it was kind of a spin on that, but it had nothing to do with religion. And so anytime you got in trouble in his class, you had to go to the 700 Club, and it was miserable. And you had to take out a volume of the encyclopedia, and you had to pick a subject, and you had to write 700 words about it. And you had to number every single word, and you had to do it, and you forfeited all recesses, all extracurricular activities until you were done with your 700 words. And the only reason I really ever got in trouble in school was for talking. And so I held the record for being in the 700 Club 3 times. Because I'm a talker. And I remember I learned about the caste system, and I would just randomly pick an encyclopedia. I learned way too much about ants, and I forget what the 3rd subject was. But after being in the 700 Club 3 times, he finally sat me down. He said, please just stop talking. Just pull back a little bit. So I think the seed was planted there. And I really do encourage people that if you are wondering what to do with your life, or maybe what to do next, because rarely these days do we stay in one career, go back to your childhood and look and see what other people noticed about you. So I haven't been speaking for that long or that consistently, but it started about 5 years ago with an invitation to Stanford MedX. And but I've made a commitment this year, 2023, to get to a point where I'm a full-time speaker.
Excellent. Well, brilliant. And I mean, I've obviously seen some of your stuff, so you're actually a fantastic speaker. So
thank you.
Your kind of journey now is different because you're on a mission, and basically I know it all kind of began because of your beautiful sister. So you might let people know about the story.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much for doing your homework. So I have a sister, Adrienne. We are 14 years apart, and we have the same mother, but different fathers. Her father actually died before she was born. And I say that to kind of set the stage. And I was always with my sister in high school. But then I left and I moved across the country to go to college. I attended USC in Los Angeles. And so I had finished my university studies. I was 22 years old, and my sister came to visit me for what was supposed to be a 2-week Christmas vacation. And she was 8 years old at the time. And the day after Christmas, our mother called and asked if I could take her for a while and said she didn't want to be a mother anymore. And I had watched from 2,000 miles away as my mother's life had really unraveled. I realized it about my junior or senior year of high school. My mother was a drug addict, but she was addicted to prescription drugs, and she was a nurse, so she had easy access. And so it didn't hold the same weight in my high school mind as someone who would be addicted to an illegal substance, right? But after I left home, my mother's life just slowly fell apart. And when she asked me to take my sister, by that time, she had lost her nursing license because she got caught shooting up morphine at work. She refused to go to rehab, even though it is quite common for nurses and doctors to have addiction issues, and it would have been paid for. And I saw the effect it was having on my sister, and I was very worried. And so I said yes, even though I had no idea what I was doing. So I said yes, even though I definitely did not have my life together. The only thing I had going for me was a college degree at that point. That's it. I had nothing else really going for me. And so I ended up eventually suing our mother in court and getting full legal and physical custody. I raised Adrienne all through my 20s. And then 1 month after her 15th birthday, an ER doctor actually changed our lives forever when he told us that she had tumors in her liver and lungs. And it was really the day before she was fine. She had been having a little bit of acid reflux, but she was a teenager. And as much as we parents try, you cannot control everything your children eat. And so I said, stop eating tacos at school, just stop. And, but that was really the only symptoms she had. And then I came home, I found her curled up in a fetal position crying instead of sitting at the kitchen table and doing her homework. And we went from her pediatrician to the ER where they did a CAT scan. The ER doctor gave us that news. And then we were immediately transferred that night to Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And from the time I came home to the time we got that news, it was only 6 hours. And I tell people that's how fast your life can change. And that's how quickly our lives changed. She never went back to school in person. By that time, I was teaching in her school district. I did not go back to work as a teacher. And 2 days later, she had a biopsy that confirmed that she had hepatocellular carcinoma, which is primary liver cancer, and it was metastatic and had spread to her lungs. And less than a week later, she was doing her first round of chemotherapy. So it was just this whirlwind of just one hit after another. And this was 20 years ago. And they really had absolutely nothing for advanced patients with liver cancer. And despite doing 5.5 rounds of chemotherapy, it did make a difference. And so Adrienne only lived 147 days with that diagnosis. And for more context for your listeners, she died 2 months after my 29th birthday. So it really changed the whole course of my life. While I was raising her, as I mentioned, I was a teacher, but I was also pursuing an acting career. And the following year, I turned 30 years old, and I was like, I don't want any of those things anymore. I don't. And so I ended up starting my nonprofit, Blue Faery, the Adrienne Wilson Liver Cancer Association, in memory of my sister. And really the only reason I started the nonprofit, well, there were two. One, I was looking for a way to channel my grief. And two, at that time, there wasn't a single other organization in the entire US that was dedicated to this very specific type of liver cancer. And I knew after going through my sister's journey and all the knowledge I gained, I knew that it was only going to increase and worldwide. And sure enough, it has. It's one of the most common cancers worldwide. It's also one of the deadliest. And it's one of the few cancers in the US that's on the rise. And so it really wasn't my life's dream to start a charity at all. I never said when I grow up I want to, start a charity, but I looked around and nobody else was doing it. And I felt like I just had to do something. And I'm so proud to say that in about 2 weeks, we will be celebrating 20 years.
Congratulations. And I know that you
Thank
actually
you.
approached other cancer organizations to even say that you'll do it, and they weren't really interested. So
They were
it
not
was kind of
interested.
like, hey, nobody's doing it, I'm going to do it, which I love.
Exactly. Yeah. I wanted to volunteer for other organizations and they were like, no, thanks.
So just,
So imagine if they had said yes, my life would have taken probably a very different turn.
I think these things turn out, and it's because you're so passionate as well. Because obviously it's a very difficult journey, especially she's so young, and that you took her. You were basically like a mother sister kind of thing,
Yes.
So I totally understand that, and I understand how sad and hard it is. But also, it's the fuel that's kind of pushing you to actually try to help others.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And I'm really happy to say, I mean, my goal is to see a cure for HCC, is what it's called for short, in my lifetime. We're not there yet, but I am so happy to say that even patients diagnosed in advanced stages are living so much long before. And it's really incredible. And so there's a variety of choices. And in most of the time living with a pretty good, if not high quality of life, which is also so important.
And I know it's a kind of touchy subject for some, but like I just with the chemo, because a lot of the time we kind of go down the chemo route, and I have loved ones that have passed and that have gone through it. I know there's other ways. I don't know for the liver because it's not something that I've kind of delved into, but I know that there's like say the Spooky 2 device, which is a frequency device. There's other different things. There's even plant medicine. There's different places around that are helping people. Is that something now that you've kind of gone down the journey that you've seen?
I really encourage patients and their families to look at all options. I do encourage them, if they are metastatic, to look at clinical trials. And what's really been coming up, I guess is the best way to say it, in the last just few years is immunotherapy. And immunotherapy has worked really well in other cancers, but it had not initially worked well in liver cancer. And it's starting to, as they're developing new drugs and also combinations to see. And this is for really all cancers across the board, because there are companies that are doing this now. It's just not affordable yet. And so if a patient has to pay out of pocket for this test, it's just outrageous how much it is. But we will get to a point where prior to doing any treatment, you will be able to test your genetics to see if you have specific biomarkers that will actually respond to that treatment. Right now, when you're given, whether it's a chemotherapy or an immunotherapy or what they call a targeted therapy,
What's
it's kind of a
immunotherapy?
guess that you'll,
What's
yeah,
immunotherapy?
yeah. Immunotherapy is using your body's own immune system to kill the cancer. And I am not the person to get like deep into the science of it, but that's just layman's terms. And like chemotherapy, there are still a lot of side effects for all of these medications. There are really severe side effects. And that's why with liver cancer, especially, the earlier you catch it, the better, because the only real cure for liver cancer is a liver transplant or surgery where you can actually remove the entire tumor. However, even with surgery, it comes back 50% of the time.
Yeah, because that's kind of what I've learned with a lot of the medical things. They don't investigate what caused it in the first place. And, they can remove half a lung. They're cutting out different parts of people's bodies for different cancers, but they never seem to ask them or investigate what actually caused it. Sometimes it could be where they're living under pylons or something like that, that then they have a better chance of actually kind of surviving from it. But unfortunately, that's never the question.
You know, and liver cancer, it actually is, because most people who have primary liver cancer do have an underlying liver disease. And so I call it, there's sort of three buckets that can potentially cause liver cancer. And one bucket is environment. You know, there are exposures to certain toxins. There's a fungus called aflatoxin, which is really common in Asia, but not here in the US or even in Europe that I'm aware of. And it's more of a correlation, not a causation, but they just know exposure to that particular fungus can possibly lead to liver cancer. So that's one. There's environment. The second bucket, which I think most people are familiar with, is viruses. So chronic hepatitis B and hepatitis C can lead to liver cancer over a long period of time because they can cause cirrhosis, which then leads to liver cancer. And then the third bucket, which is what needs to be talked about more now, and some people might be more familiar with, is lifestyle choices. And I know before my sister was diagnosed, the only thing I knew about liver cancer was, well, alcoholism can lead to liver cancer. But that's not the most common cause of liver cancer in the US. And I believe even in the UK, the most common cause of liver cancer for years was the baby boomer generation that had hepatitis C and didn't know it. Now that is really shifting here in the US. I don't want to speak about other countries because it's a little bit different. But here now, one of the most common causes that can lead to liver cancer is what they call NASH. And NASH or NAFLD, which is essentially a type of fatty liver disease. And that boils down to obesity. And nobody wants to talk about it, even though obesity is linked to not only liver cancer, but 12 other types of cancer. And so as long as obesity continues to rise around the world, liver cancer isn't going away.
And like I remember, I don't know, over 20 years ago, I went to Florida, and I remember I was shocked with the obesity levels there. Then I saw it coming to Ireland, and I was like, and it's in the UK. I moved to Poland, and it was kind of like everybody was fit, and now it's like
Interesting.
all the fast foods are here, and now there's
Oh,
serious obesity in Poland as well. It's
yeah.
something I didn't think would happen, and just in a short period like that,
Oh, it's around the
a
world.
very high percentage area. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say, even though, yeah, I moved back to Alabama 8 years ago, I'm from all over the Southeast. I actually went to high school here, and my sister was born here in Birmingham, Alabama, not England, to be clear. But it was still a culture shock coming back after living in Los Angeles for so long. Not that every person in Los Angeles is fit, but the entertainment industry is so vital there, and employs so many people that people tend to be fitter in Los Angeles. Even though California is not the fittest state in the country, I think that still belongs to Colorado, where there's so many outdoor sports. But coming back to the South, yeah, it was a little bit of a shock. It still is. It still is when I get off the plane after going somewhere else and coming here and going, oh my gosh, 50% of the population's obese, easily, easily.
It's terrible. So with
Yeah.
the name of the charity, because it's not Fairy, Fairy, which is the fairy I know. It's pronounced it's a different Faery. Yeah. Is there a
Yeah.
difference between that? Because I actually had to check it. I was like, was that spelled wrong? But both are showing like fairies, and I don't know why there's a different kind of spelling for it.
Well, the American spelling is with the I, so IRY. But my sister had always wanted to go to Ireland. She was obsessed with going to Ireland, and she loved to spell any word that she could spell sort of the Irish British way she would. And so that's why we spell fairy with an E and not with an I. It's really just another way. It's a tribute to her.
Brilliant. No, excellent. So I saw you speaking at MedX. I never even heard of MedX, but it's obviously a medical TEDx kind of thing, yeah?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I suppose let's kind of talk on that, because one, you can kind of touch on what you were discussing, but your preparation for that and how you got about to actually speaking there.
Yeah, it was one of the first talks I'd ever given in that kind of context with that kind of stage. And it's still one of my favorites. I've gone back and looked at the talks I've done since, and I'm like, nope, that's still my favorite. It was fairly short. It was 5.5 minutes. I was invited to apply for what they call their e-patient scholar program, specifically to speak. And it was someone I knew in the patient advocacy space who nominated me. So I applied. And then I really stressed about what to talk about. I wasn't sure. I went through a lot of different topics. They give you a mentor. And I finally decided on how euphemisms help us deal with death. Because one of the things I struggled with for the first 6 or 7 years after my sister died, I couldn't say the word died. I just couldn't do it. It's like if I said that D word, then it meant it was true. And so I really struggled with that. And so that's what the talk was about, was how we use euphemisms. And I think one of the favorite parts of the talk was I found this incredible map of euphemisms across the US and
I
how every
see.
state has different euphemisms. And some are really common, like, passed away. But then there are some like, bought the farm. What? I mean,
I know.
or
I've
departed.
never heard that one, but I saw it
I
on
know,
the thing.
departed. And I think my favorite one, and this was only like one state, and they based this on obituaries in each state. So that's how they came up with this map, was gone to another world. Like, what? Like, just gone? I mean, but there are just so many euphemisms. And so I just had
Pushing
such a
up
good time.
daisies was another
Oh,
one.
that's one of my favorites because at least that's clever, right? I think
Yeah.
that's kind of clever. But cashing in his chips, there's another one. It's so silly. But I also realized going through my own grief, just everybody really struggles. And I don't know if that's primarily a Western culture American thing. I'm not sure. But people really struggle with saying the word die. They really, really do. And so the talk tells a little bit about my story, but it also talks about all these euphemisms. And one of my calls to action right at the conference was to come up to me after and tell me your favorite euphemism for death. And they were hilarious. Like there was one person and people were tweeting me, and one person, it was like kicked off his clogs. Like, what? What? Yeah. So I'm really passionate talking about dying with dignity and having that death conversation.
Excellent. So the book then, the book was basically about your journey during the time. Yeah.
Yeah, so the book, it's very plot driven in that it follows those 147 days of Adrienne's cancer journey, where each chapter is a day or a period of days. And I did it that way because I kept a medical diary the entire time she was sick, but she was also an amazing writer, and she had started a journal before she ever got sick and kept writing in it. And out of respect for her privacy, I never read it. So I didn't read her entire journal until about a year or two after she died. And so by day 3, every chapter is introduced with her own words. So you really get to see the perspective of this teenage patient dealing with cancer and my perspective as the parent and primary caregiver and sister, and how our perspectives really, there was a point where they just completely diverged, where she knew she was dying and I thought she was getting better. Um, I do use flashbacks throughout the book to fill in those gaps prior to the cancer journey. So it really is about that 7-year period in my life of raising her and then losing her to cancer.
And I think that's like just listening to what you've covered, that would help anybody going through with a loved one that has cancer, because you're seeing it from both perspectives, and there's a lot of confusion when things like this. And I know you mentioned as well that one, and I thought it was very good, you were talking about what not to say to people.
Yes. Yeah. So I think people, when they're trying to comfort someone whose loved one has died, I think really they're just trying to comfort themselves. You know, they mean well. I think people have good intentions for the most part, but things like God only gives you what you can handle. That one is like probably my biggest pet peeve, because if you take it to its logical conclusion, that means that only strong people get sick, you know, because we can handle it. You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous. She's in a better place. That may be true, but that doesn't make me feel better in the moment. She's no longer in pain. Again, that may be true, but doesn't make me feel better at all. And, you know, so what I tell people is it's okay, one, not to know what to say. And if you've never experienced a traumatic loss, you probably won't know what to say. But I just tell people, just say, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for your loss. You know, that's enough. It's enough. That tells people that you care, you know, and if the person, you know, if it's not over Zoom, if it's in person and they're a hugger and you're a hugger, and ask if they would like a hug. I mean, that's really the best you can do, because grief is it's gnarly. It's really tough, and that's what my next book is about. Actually, is grieving in my 30s and all these different life changes that I made.
Excellent, excellent. So with the podcast then, because I believe, is it 2 podcasts you have, or did you start one and then you had another one after that?
I had a limited series podcast that I did now 5 years ago, where essentially it was the audio version of my book. And because I worked on my book for a long time, I had incredible mentors. I had many readers for the first draft. It had gone through all these drafts. It had been professionally edited multiple times, but I couldn't get an agent because they said the writing was excellent, the story was amazing, but it was too sad. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there in this podcast format and just see how people respond. And it was funny because the podcast was an afterthought. I initially thought I'll just put it on YouTube, but then I'm a real big fan of how can you repurpose content. And so the week before, I was like, you know what, I'm going to also make this a podcast. And I knew nothing about podcasting. So if you go back and listen to that podcast from 5 years ago, I apologize. The volume levels are a nightmare. So, but I did it and I couldn't believe the response. It was overwhelming. I mean, I don't check anymore, but toward the end of it, there were over 30,000 downloads. And like I said, this was a very limited 40 episode series over a 5-month period. And it directly mimicked exactly what our cancer journey was like. And my nonprofit ended up getting some amazing volunteers because of it, and donors as well. And those were just, you know, additional benefits I didn't see coming. But it really gave me the momentum to go, okay, there is an audience for this. People understand that there's just going to be a sad ending, but there's a lot of humor too. And so 2 years later, I ended up publishing the book. And then the podcast I have now is not specific to my journey. I actually interview other people. I interview cancer patients, caregivers, survivors, and providers. And we just a few weeks ago celebrated 100 episodes.
Oh, excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So,
and I've gotten much better at the sound part of it.
Trust
I've
me,
learned all the
I
tools.
cringe because I started in, I think, November 2018. I go back and listen to my first episodes and I go, oh my God.
Yeah.
But you know, it is what it is. And
yeah,
it's
it was such a good learning experience though, right? And I'm actually, the audiobook of my book is coming out in March, I think, for sure. I recorded it in September, and I waited so long to do the audiobook because I wanted someone to be a co-narrator to do all of my sister's lines in her voice. And it was one of those things where, you know, in a perfect world, you publish all editions of your book at one time, including the audiobook. But for me, I wanted to wait until I found the right person to do her voice. It was so important for me. And I finally did. It took a long time. And then we finally were able to get our schedules together. And so I actually spent a week outside of Nashville at a recording studio recording with her. And it was amazing.
Oh, brilliant. And yeah, I like the fact that you actually held off till you knew yourself, what you wanted. And I think when you do that, you always get the better rewards from it.
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
So
People
with
will
the,
accuse you of being picky, but
yeah,
that's okay.
nah, no, I think you just know yourself, you know what you want, and you wait till that moment till you have it, and then you feel 10 times better. And the results will actually be 10 times better because of, that you didn't just jump in and just do it. Even if, like, I think the fact that you had two voices is actually better because people then can kind of connect better with it as well. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with the charity then, because there's a lot of people also, I suppose, trying to help, or they have their own charity and everything. So what advice, things that you've done and maybe perhaps kind of made mistakes and said shouldn't have done this, that you could help, that not only will help your own, obviously you can list your own one that people might be interested, but for those that are kind of doing their own ones, that you could give them a bit of advice to try to help their charities.
Well, first I would say, don't reinvent the wheel because charities, it's a very competitive space. I mean, I swear it's more competitive than the for-profit space just because the dollars are so limited that you're trying to get, especially when you're trying to get big educational grants. And it really pits charities against each other, and that's not great. And to your point, because you did your homework, had one of those other organizations allowed me to volunteer and create a program for them, I would not have started my own charity. I started it because nobody was doing anything in that very specific space. So my first piece of advice is don't reinvent the wheel because it's a grind. It really is. And if there's a charity out there that like, and respect, and they're doing things that you want to do, go volunteer and go work for them, do that, because you don't want to compete against them. However, if there's not a charity, then I would say the biggest mistake I made was starting the charity with friends. And people don't like to hear that advice, but it really broke up a lot of my friendships because they didn't really understand what the purpose was of the charity. And I was just so dedicated and so driven and so focused on making it happen. And my friends wanted to help. And I was like, oh, that's great. But, you know, your friends may not be your best business partners. And even though it's a charity, it's still business. Even though it's a nonprofit, you actually still have to make a profit. It just goes back into the business. And I've had friendships evolve now from people I've worked with on my charity, but they were not my friends to begin with, and I think that's a better evolution. It totally makes sense if a business partner becomes a good friend, but it's very difficult to start a business with a good friend or even a romantic partner.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that. I think sometimes people go in and they just expect somebody to do it and say one person's more passionate, and some people just kind of trot along, and it can be frustrating when you have a mission to kind of do it. And yeah, you don't want to be kind of affecting your friendship because you're friends for a reason,
Exactly.
and it's better not. I agree with you. It's better to be really careful before, whether it's a non-profit or a normal business, think carefully between a spouse, our family, friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very.
Absolutely. And find people with complementary skill sets. You don't want people like you. You don't want people that have the same skills or the same personality. You want people that bring something else to the table.
No, absolutely. So I know that you're kind of going for kind of getting more speaking gigs and everything. So what have you kind of learned from when you started doing it to know? Like, what kind of little tips that you could give people that you go, oh, I can't believe I did that. And now you're obviously, each time something goes wrong, it's for the better, but we don't think it at the
Mm.
time.
I would say the biggest tip is I didn't trust myself enough. So there were many speaking opportunities I did where I kept my notes with me and I knew the material and I just didn't trust myself enough and that hurt and I think it showed. Um, Also, it's really easy to say yes to speaking gigs when they're coming to you And that's what was happening for me over the last 5 years, here and there, getting a speaking gig. But I have realized now that just because someone wants me to speak doesn't mean I'm the right speaker for them. It doesn't mean it's the right topic. It doesn't mean it's the right audience. And so I am much pickier now and much more focused. And also I really understand my value. So when you start speaking, yes, you're probably going to have to speak for free. People want to do a TEDx talk. Well, TEDx doesn't pay anybody. I mean, it's great to have, to promote and have, and as part of your speaker reel, but they don't pay. And a lot of places don't pay. And so you really need to think about what's going to work best for you. And so I think I had a tendency before to just say yes to everything to get experience. And I, over the last year, have pulled way back. I was supposed to speak at an event in October in Philadelphia. And again, it was a medical conference, and they essentially gave me the topic and said, here, you've got this area of expertise, talk about it. And I just went, they're not paying me. I mean, they're covering all the travel and everything, but they're not paying me. I'm not excited about this topic, even though I'm very knowledgeable on it. And I don't think I'm the best speaker for this. And that may have hurt me. I mean, with that organization, it's possible, but I just had to trust myself. I had another opportunity that came up to speak March of 2023. And it's a pretty prestigious speaking opportunity because it's speaking to all different divisions of the National Cancer Institute. But we kind of came to a compromise. They don't pay any of their speakers. And so I agreed to speak virtually if I get to pick the topic. But I'm not traveling somewhere on my dime to speak. You know what I mean? I'm not going to do that. So you just have to be really methodical about it and remember it's a business. Initially, yes, speak wherever you can because it's the only way you're going to get better. But then go back and really look at what's working and what's not working for you.
No, excellent advice. Excellent advice. Listen, Andrea, thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. You might let people know where the charity and the different things where they can find you.
Absolutely. So my personal website is just my name, AndreaWilsonWoods.com. All the socials are there. For my book, you can go to betteroffbald.com and it'll have all the retailers there as well. And for Blue Faery, it's bluefaery.org. And again, that's FAERY.org.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll make sure I put both the links in the audio and the video. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's all for the Speaking Podcast. As mentioned, we're on BitChute and YouTube. You'll find the links in the podcast description. Find everything about me, bio.link/podcaster. Sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, really helps. Make sure you give Andrea a 5-star rating on her podcast as well. And if you buy our book, do the same because it always helps. Puts it up the charts and lets people see it. Yeah. So,
it does help.
So until next week, take care.